Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Welcome or welcome back. Whether you are a longtime listener or you are brand new to the podcast, I am thrilled that you're here with me. Today's guest is someone whose work and philosophy around how we care for our dogs and for ourselves has been truly impactful for me with my relationship with Lucky, and I'm delighted that he's joining me for an insightful conversation about the emotional lives and well-being of our dogs. I know you are going to love this. Andrew Hale is a certified animal behaviorist and dog trainer who follows a dog-centered care approach that focuses on empathy and compassion and curiosity to better understand why a dog is exhibiting a particular behavior. Andrew is a behavior consultant for a number of organizations, including Pet Remedy, Canine Arthritis Management, British Isles Grooming Association, and Animals in Distress. In today's episode, Andrew shares why we need more cake in our lives with our dogs and with others. No, it's not a delicious dessert, but you'll definitely love it. We talk about a variety of topics related to thinking about how to create emotional safety for our beloved pups, including how we would benefit from looking at behavior as a way to communicate a need, to seek connection, and to find relief, the coercive potential of reinforcement, the value of asking different questions, what attachment styles are and how we can better create secure relationships with our dogs through them, and the relationship between the nervous system and behavior. Andrew shares a personal story about childhood sexual trauma, so just a heads up if this is triggering for you. This is another one of those super important conversations that those of us who are committed to nourishing our dog's mind, body, and soul need to be having. I know you're going to love it. If you enjoy a whole dog, whole person approach to your dog's health with a spiritual touch like we talk about today, then come and join Stacy Renfrey of Hozo Hounds and me in our brand new Fetch membership, where we'll share with you the very same framework that we use in our canine nutrition practices to help get to the root of health challenges and get your dog on the pathway to optimal health. Our Fetch membership is officially open for founding members. Honestly, we are so unbelievably excited to create this space with you. If you are looking for a community and space that brings together evidence-based nutrition with spiritual wisdom, all aimed at taking the confusion and overwhelm out of nourishing your dog, then you are in the right place. And as a founding member, you'll get in at the lowest price and get to help us shape the membership so that we can create exactly what you need and want. I mean, how amazing is that? If you'd like more information, comment Fetch if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, or you can reach out to me at mysticdogmama.com and we'll get you the information. And don't forget, if you haven't joined our newsletter, make sure that you do so that you can get our brand new guide to decoding your dog's energetic paw print for free. I've left the link in the show notes. Okay, on that note, let's go. Andy, thank you so much for joining me on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. I'm thrilled to have you as my guest.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I have been wanting to talk to you for a really long time because your work has just been so impactful on my journey with my own dog, Lucky, but also the way that I have conversations with listeners about our dogs, the way that I work with nutrition clients with their dogs. And I think it offers a really valuable opportunity for us to step back and focus on ideas of wellness, ideas of a holistic approach to our dogs, and really focusing on the dog's emotional well-being when it comes to the way that we're really structuring our lives with them. So I'm excited to dive into stuff with you today.
Well, good. And I think, what's great about your platform is what I try to do with mine is understanding how we need to have many voices that come in, and we nobody has a kind of the ultimate answer to anything. It's trying to understand those different threads and what they mean for us, for our own lived experience, and also these wonderful animals that we share our lives with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mentioned before we started recording that I had a conversation with your friend and colleague, Jill Breitner, and she was mentioning about how she uses an article you wrote quite a while ago now called The Phantom of the Operant as a kind of starting point for introducing her clients to
the way that she works with dogs and the kind of worldview that she's coming from. And I actually thought that might be a really helpful way to start to structure and frame our conversation today, because I think it offers a really beautiful way of encapsulating the way that your work looks at asking us to look differently at the way that we're thinking about training our dogs. And I think it would be useful for listeners to hear. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I wrote the Phantom of the Opera. It's quite a while ago, no, it's 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even. To try and just really, it's a piece about compassion and empathy, actually, and understanding. I think we can all understand what punishment does. Punishment just, and there is a societal need to punish. By the way, it's ingrained in us because we have this notion that. Actually, let's step back a little bit. Let me frame this bit better for the audience. So for those listening, we're going to go a bit human-y psychology now, but I will bring it back to doggies. We're all kind of conditioned into what we class as the good-bad continuum. This notion that somehow behavior is bad, good through to bad. And underpinning that is this need to want to reward and support the good and to punish or ignore the bad. And we're very indoctrinated in that to the point that we don't really question it because we want more of the good. We want less of the bad, it seems right. Until we start asking questions about who's deciding what's good or bad. This is the point. And more importantly, what did those behaviors represent to the other? And the point of the Phantom of the Operant, really. So operant is just a form of learning, really. And it's very much because it has been said in the past, we don't know how animals think and feel, so we're not going to go there. We will just focus in on the behavior. Do we have more behavior? Do we have less behavior? And that's why a lot of animal training, especially dog training specifically, or our relationship with dogs has ended up being, and it's quite a newish thing, really. It's the last 30 or 40 years, really, we've had this big training focus with a big emphasis on compliance. And the general public especially have been convinced that the most important thing is a well-trained, obedient dog. The question, though, is what about the dog's innate needs? People talk about boundaries. Alexia, boundaries are important, but there's a problem if they become barriers to unmet need. We could be having the same conversation about children now, because that metric, that good-bad continuum, is what gave us children should be seen and not heard, women should be seen and not heard, minorities should be seen and not heard, and dogs should be seen and not heard. So beyond the Phantom of the Opera was just questioning some of this stuff. The fact that we have a very powerful operant toolkit that includes punishment and also includes reinforcement. Understanding that punishment obviously just stops behavior in inverted commas, but doesn't do anything about the innate need. We'll unpack that in a moment for the animal or the child. But even, this is the bit that was a bit controversial at the time, I suppose, recognizing the coercive potential of reinforcement. Because the point is, just because we can get the behavior, get another to change their behavior through positive means, still doesn't mean that some of those innate needs are being met by the other. And there's a great saying in human psychology, which is the path to coercion is often laid with good intention. And we have to just think about stuff. So that was the point of the Phantom of the Operant, just to get people to start thinking about things, thinking about if I'm going to turn up to support, influence, change the behavior of another living sentient being, maybe we need to think about what we're doing, actually, and the consequences, the true nature of consequences.
No, I love that. And actually, I was just having a conversation with Yaz Parrott around, we were initially talking about pain, but she said, we have to remember too, this brings up exactly what you're saying, that we've created a structure in our relationship with our dogs where we've stripped them of most agency. And she said, domesticated dogs are the only domesticated animals that have to ask to go to the toilet, a basic need and arguably right to be able to go and relieve themselves, but they're completely dependent upon us creating that permission for them to go out. And that was a really powerful thing to be reminded of. And I think it's important what you're saying, that just it kind of goes back to, like, just because we can doesn't mean that we should. when we're trying to create different behaviors. Yeah.
And a realization, and it's a difficult one for dog trainers. I know, but it's a realization that has come in the progressive side of child support, child education and development, and a realization that's come in criminology, within the penal system, especially about, we've put a big emphasis to say we, as a society, we have a societal need to punish because it's like, well, that's bad, so we must punish you. But actually, we know that punishment from a human point of view doesn't work either.
Mm-hmm.
The realization is many people think they understand behavior within the dog world, especially. Many people think they are dog behavior experts. In fact, what they know is just how to get another living being to behave. And there is a big difference. And I think this is the shift that's happening. It's like, okay, I in the Phantom of the Opera, and I call it the opera merry-go-round. We have got stuck about how to get the dogs to behave, and that's the constant discussions about methods and tools, and the general public well, I hear all these different things. Yes, because if you're going to make another living being do something, there's 101 ways to do it. And that's what I call that task-orientated focus. What we're talking about, Alexia, is shifting to a more care-orientated one. Now, if you're in a task-orientated focus, it doesn't mean you don't care, but the more the task is supreme, the less you can care. And actually, punishment, aversion is the ultimate manifestation of task at all costs, really. The task must happen or else. The care approach, again, doesn't mean that we're not looking for task. It just means that we're going to take the time and be humble enough to learn from the other first. And I said earlier this notion that, well, we don't know how animals think and feel. Well, I don't know how you think and feel, Alexia. So do I ignore that and make you do things, make you behave based on my set of beliefs and values, my idea of what safety means? Mm-hmm. Or do I try and make myself more available to your emotional truth?
Oh, I love that. And actually, that makes me think of what you've used as the acronym of C.A.K.E as well, which I think is a really brilliant acronym for helping us to start to actually question, become open and aware to the fact that not everybody or everything thinks and feels the way that we do. So maybe that's a good time to kind of unpack what you were describing with C.A.K.E.
Well, C.A.K.E's important because as humans, by the time we get to our late 20s, our brain has pretty well decided on what we call our safe worldview. And it's developed, those kind of belief systems, those value systems, a lot of which, by the way, the only reason we have them is because other people have told us it. It's not necessarily based in any fact. And so that worldview, then, the brain doesn't want to have to reappraise that. So the brain likes cognitive appraisals, which is that instant thing. And that's why we are really quick to judge. There's a great little saying, which is, we all love to judge, but we hate to be judged. But we do judge. We can't not, because our brain wants to take it. It's very efficient, pushes it through that filter of our worldview and how do I feel about it. And the problem there is that not the judging bit, but when it starts to drive our responses, that's the problem. And that's why that question we asked earlier, I might think that child or that person's or that dog's behavior is bad, but that's based on my worldview of what that is they're doing. I have no idea about what lies behind it for them. So we have to be mindful of that. And the thing is, our brain wants to protect our worldview, and that's why we have our cognitive biases and distortions. So this is challenging then, isn't it? So we have to find a way then, especially as professionals, but also if we want to think, okay, my dog's really annoying me, irritating me, whatever it is, and we have to recognize that, and we have to allow those emotions. But at some point, if we want to step off what I call the conflict cycle that we go through with our loved ones and our dogs, with just lots of nervous systems getting irritated by each other and having behavioral responses accordingly, we have to step back and think, right, I need to be more available here to what my dog might be experiencing, or my friend or my colleague or my loved one. And that's where C.A.K.E helps. So C.A.K.E just stands for compassion, awareness, knowledge, and empathy. Happens to spell cake, which is good because we all love cake. So I think let's just try and bring some cake. I wanted to do a little point there. It's okay not to bring cake sometimes. Sometimes for our own protection, our own social and emotional safety, it's okay to have boundaries where we think, I can't go there. That's fine, by the way. We don't all have to suddenly turn into Mother Teresa or anything. So compassion, first one. Compassion is the starting point always. One thing to remember about compassion, it is not about agreeing with, condoning, or being permissive. It's about, despite my judgments, despite my feelings, I will turn up anyway. And that's a good place to start. Compassion's always a good place to start. I'll turn up anyway. I'll listen. I'll be available. Awareness is about allowing ourselves to truly try and be aware of the lived experience of another, whilst being aware of our own biases. And that's tough. It is tough. We have to do that, especially as professionals. We owe it, regardless of what I think about the client or the situation. That's not why I'm here. I'm here trying to get awareness. And I want to get awareness from the caregiver about their own emotional experience. And that means seeking knowledge. I think it's very easy as professionals to just turn up with the knowledge that we have and then project it out. And this is something really important. There is a difference between what we are taught and what we learn. And often what we are taught is another turning up with, I that knows must tell you that you do not. And there's a power imbalance there if we're not careful. And that happens a lot, sadly, in all sorts of areas of life. The reason is that difference is because there is a difference between structured learning and experiential learning. So, we can all remember being at school, and now, especially me in my mid-50s, not remembering much of what I was taught, but I'm still being affected by what I learned regarding safety with my peers, safety with authority, learning experience. So awareness is important, knowledge is important. And then I think with that compassion, awareness, and knowledge, Alexa, we have a better chance of having true empathy, and being able to bear witness to the lived experience of another, to try and get it. And understanding that actually for all of us, there are three things that bind us all, really: humans, dogs, cats, horses, anything. We all want to feel heard. It's just really important, especially when we're trying to communicate need. Behaviour, especially for young children and doggies, but also even for us adults, is a way to communicate need, the need for connection. We're a social species. The need for safety, we'll come on to that in a minute because it's the biggest chunk for me. And the need to find relief. So we want to feel heard. We all want to feel safe. We all want to find relief. Relief for me is one of the most important words in the psychology of behavior, because the reason we feel the negative-y stuff especially is because it's our body's way of saying, I need to not feel like this. I need to find relief. Physical pain for sure, but also emotional pain and social pain. So a lot of behaviors that we see from children and dogs that we might class as being bad, difficult, challenging, naughty, the usual list, are often relief seeking or connection seeking, or trying to connect through relief, relief and connection together. So yes, I think it's important. Bringing cake is a good place to start, I think.
Oh, that's so rich and a very rich cake and very important at that. And I think there were so many things that popped into my head around that. And one of the things that you mentioned, so in terms of even recognizing the knowledge we bring to the table, that we're expecting others have the same, all of that, I think embedded in there too, that is the need for us to become curious and ask questions, especially as professionals. And how I feel anyways from the nutrition, my experience as a nutrition consultant, that the times that I've been able to ask different questions, better quality questions, actually gets me a much richer answer, in a sense, gives me more information, but also helps the pet parent to understand that their experience is perhaps the most valid. Their knowledge that they hold is actually the most valid in this interaction. So to your point of disrupting the kind of hierarchy, and I wondered what you kind of think about in terms of what are some questions from your experience that we should be asking now in light of the research that you've done, the experiences that you've had working with dogs and people, where we're at in this journey right now in the dog world, what are some questions that you think would be important to be asking in terms of really creating that safety that C.A.K.E is really designed to do?
I think it's two sides. I think working with the general public, especially, I think we have to, this is how I work anyway, we have to acknowledge and turn up to their lived experience. That's why we truly have to seek the knowledge from them on that, on their terms and in their language. I think we can very easily say, oh, well, we don't say that anymore, and dominance isn't the thing like that, and all kind of things. And we just need to hear it and ask those questions, I often frame things in like, for example, would you feel comfortable sharing with me that particular thing, or why that affected you, or why you do that? Because I'm interested to know, because a lot of the time, I remember working with a lady who was quite rigid in her outlook, and she'd used a lot of aversive tools, and she very much felt that there had to be consequences and these kind of things. And we just really spent a lot of time asking those type of questions, safety-based questions for her. When we boiled down to it, and she was using a lot of words like correction and discipline and all these kind of things, when it came down to it, and this was the time that I saw the emotion from her, because a lot of the time when we're a bit stiff and a bit rigid, it's our defense mechanisms to being emotional. One thing about emotional safety, Alexia, there's two parts of it. One is feeling safe to even feel. Many of us go through our lives where we feel our emotions are so invalid and we can't communicate them that we even feel bad about feeling. But also the second part, which is totally relevant to our dogs, is feeling safe to communicate how you feel. And we are shutting our dogs down, even with reinforcement training from an early age, because of the kind of the compliance lens. So where's the dog's opportunity to say, well, I can't do this now, or this is uncomfortable for me, or I've got other things I need to process it. So it's interesting when we had this conversation to see that her eyes kind of have that little glimmer of tear when she says, I just want to keep him safe.
Oh God.
See, and so we got to the crux of it, and I'm like, right, that's what we're going to. So I totally get now, and I often say to clients, I get it, or I hear you, because that's what they want to feel, really. I think on a bigger picture, I love what you said there. It isn't about anything being right or wrong. It's just about asking different questions.
Yeah.
Different questions, and an understanding that we share so much. That dog needs to feel safe. It needs to find relief for that physical pain, emotional pain, social pain. The only way it can communicate is through its behavior. And we have to understand that. We have to change how we view behavior. We have to see it in a different way, and we have to ask different questions, and a lot of whys, not the hows necessarily. I also work with a gentleman who a very stereotypy blokey chap, ex-services. He was a divorcee, lived on his own with his dog, very kind of quite rough and tumbly butch bloke, I guess. So when I met him, his dog struggled in the social environment. When he was out, the dog would respond to barking and lunging. He would hit the dog with the end of the lead, smack him on the bum with the lead. And so again, we went through the same process, but I brought C.A.K.E. Part of my brain was like, God, that's really horrible, or whatever. But if I had have challenged him, if I said, look, that isn't right, he could either have thought, well, I don't feel safe with you now, like me. He might have, got into whatever. He might have thought, oh, yes, of course, I'm terribly sorry, I'll change. But that's unlikely. More likely, he wouldn't do it while I was around. But he'd do it when I wasn't. So I haven't changed anything. So we went through the same process of me trying to understand and make a connection, help him feel safe. We have the 3 A's in human therapies, which I think we need to recognize, because the 3 A's are happening all the time: awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance. I have to go through my awareness of what's going on. I have to go through my acknowledgement, and I have to go through my acceptance. And acceptance often is letting go of our own expectations, actually, and our own beliefs and values. Sometimes we have to accept this situation. But my role is to support the client through their awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance. So I have to be connected. So anyway, a moment for me was when he said to me, do you know what? Now I understand that my behavior was based on the fact that I was embarrassed and angry. Yes. Yes. Now that realization for him, Alexa, means that it's very unlikely he's ever done that again since. Because I get it. Because our behavior is motivated by predominantly how we feel. And none of us are saints. And we can all have situations where we felt overwhelmed, overloaded, we're embarrassed, especially the social rejection stuff. It's powerful. Our brain doesn't like it. And that's why many people really struggle with, in inverted commas, reactive dogs for themselves as a caregiver, because they feel the pressure. But we also see that awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance. When we support them to be more aware of their dog's lived experience, and then we have to support them through that acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, one of the barriers there often is guilt. Because if you've now made somebody aware, if they've thought before, well, my dog's being dominant, naughty, difficult, challenging, now they're like, oh, wow, my dog's in pain or my dog's stressed, and I feel really bad now about what I've done, they're going to struggle to acknowledge because the guilt will stop them. And that's why we have to reframe guilt for people. Guilt has one of two ways. It either keeps us chained to the past because I wish I'd done that, I wish I'd done that. Well, guess what? We can't go to the past. Or we change our relationship with that feeling and understand actually we've learned something deeply, very deeply, about our past actions or past events that actually can equip us and drive us forwards with our responses moving forward. So we move away from the past and we have a more positive. So I think for any professionals listening, if somebody says to you, well, I feel guilty, don't say to them, don't feel guilty. Say to them, do you know what? That feeling you feel just shows that you've learned something very important, and use that to motivate you for what you do next. I think it's important. So once we get to acknowledgement, and some people can't, Alexa, this is something else for professionals. Some people, their own trauma, their own insecure attachments, their own past histories, find it really hard to acknowledge what's happening. And we can do our best to support them, but we're not ultimately responsible for that. I had a lady not so long ago who said, oh, I get it. I do get it. She said, but it's like I say to my children, you can feel what you like, but just don't show it. And it makes you think, what's happened to you in your early life, especially where you've been so conditioned that there must be consequence for bad behavior, that emotions are fine, but we have to act and behave in a certain way. And that's part of her survival story too. So we just have to recognize what we can do. But if people can get to acceptance, that's where best outcomes come. And actually, acceptance creates an armor for us that allows us to advocate. And advocation ultimately is the best shield to the judgment of others.
Oh my God, just all of that. All of that. That's so good. And you got me teared up with with the woman who finally came to the conclusion that she just wanted her dog to feel safe, because God, such a gut punch. Like, you can imagine the pain that she must have been experiencing in her own life. Like you're pointing to our childhood traumas, etc. And she's doing the best that she can for that dog with the tools that she had at that time. And I think that is important for us as professionals to remember, that people are, I mean, for any of us to remember, to be honest, we're always ever doing our best for where we're at that particular time, with the tools, the experiences, our nervous system capability, etc. And I think if we can remember that also applies for ourselves as well, giving ourselves that kind of grace to understand where we're at any particular moment. I actually think if we can add that to the list of kind of the 3A's, it helps us move through the 3A's a little bit better when we become, like you were talking about, like less judgmental in terms of making somebody right or wrong with what they're doing, but through that lens of empathy, of really understanding where is this coming from? Because we talk about it with our dogs, but it's the same for us, that behavior is really information. It's telling us about where we're at, where somebody is at, where the dog is at, and very much linked to their nervous system state as well. And so that helps to reframe then how we're engaging with that behavior.
Yeah, and the nervous system is very important here, because we talk about learned behavior all the time, but it is misrepresented. Because learned behavior, there is a misrepresentation that means that we're only learning cognitively. The nervous system is learning too. It is learning from the moment we're born. In fact, all the evidence now shows it's prenatal even. before we even come out of a mom. So that hence why now we know that those young babies who brain-wise might not be able to process much, but the nervous system is processing everything. And that's why the brain's a bit stupid, really, because we can influence the brain to do a lot of stuff. But if the nervous system don't believe it, it don't believe it. And I think there's a lot of friction there. A lot of people who have gone through maybe a CBT program. I'm not knocking CBT, but I think we have to recognize there are limitations there. You can get something to think differently and behave differently, but if the nervous system doesn't believe it, if part of that trauma hasn't been supported, if part of that there isn't those changes in those attachments, all these kind of things, then we have other problems, and it just happens that way. So we have to convince the nervous system too. So all these things are very important. And I think especially as professionals, we have to understand where people are at. And I agree with you completely. The vast majority of people are not trying to be deliberately difficult or cruel with their animals. They're just trying the best they can through that lens of, if I change behavior, everything else will be okay. Because we're, say, as a society, especially here in the West, that is the lens that many of us are put through.
Right.
I've shared this story before. I'll share it with you here. It's a personal story. But I had sexualized trauma when I was young, when I was a child, with inflicted on me by non-family members. I like to put that up. But because of that trauma, the thing about trauma, that things that overwhelm us on many levels, and actually it's a lot of the time it's about losing our agency over how we engage with something and our inability to escape from it. That's the theme that runs through. Nothing changed in my environment. And again, in dog training, we talk about the environment. Nothing changed in my environment. What changed was my perception of it.
Right.
My lack of safety now. So how I saw my parents, how I saw my school, how I saw my friends. So my behavior changed. And the school took a punishment approach, and to the point that I had the cane at one point, corporal punishment. And guess what? My behavior changed, because it works to change behavior. I changed my behavior. I thought, well, I don't want that to happen again. My parents thought that my behavior was changing because my parents were very successful people. They worked a lot. I had everything I wanted as a kid, but what I didn't have was them, because they're out working and earning it. So my father said, we're going to do more as a family, contingent on you behaving differently, because this has got to change. So that was a more positive kind of way of looking at stuff. And I wanted more of them. So of course my behavior changed. But the real consequence for me was my breakdown some 15 years later. Because this is the reality, Alexa. Just because we change behavior doesn't mean anything if the individual still doesn't feel safe, still can't find relief for what they want. If one of my teachers had brought C.A.K.E, I think it would have been a teacher who saw beyond my behavior, didn't judge it, was just held space, offered that connection, I might have shared what happened, and the consequence of that could have been quite profound for the rest of my life. So this is important stuff. It's important stuff. And it comes to this thing about social safety ultimately, and being social and what that really means. Because being social is actually quite hard. Functioning socially is hard. There's a lot of things that have to be ticked. So even for us, if you're not feeling well or you're stressed and you see a friend downtown or whatever, you're more likely to avoid them because you don't have the bandwidth to be sociable. And that's with a safe social connection, let alone being in a place you know. So a lot of the dogs I work with who struggle around other dogs, for example, don't have a problem with other dogs. When we actually do the good observations, I'm lucky I've got a 2-acre space that I use. The problem for them is they've got other stuff they're dealing with, actually that bit of social processing is difficult. But if we look at all the evidence now, I'm giving a talk actually in a few days' time at a conference, looking at all this stuff, because when we look at the human side of things, when we think about criminality, especially violent crime, all the studies show categorically, and in fact, a meta-analysis of many studies showed that attachment, insecure attachment, was one thing that went through everything. And nearly 80% of respondents over many, 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 many studies interviewing those who have, often men, criminal acts, especially violent criminal acts, identified with insecure attachment. So it makes sense because as a social species, I mean, we might think, what's that got to do with dogs? We've got everything to do with dogs because John Bowlby, who's the kind of person we think about who started to think about the importance of having a secure base, especially as we were growing up, he didn't get that inspiration from children initially. He got it from looking at his colleagues like Conrad Lawrence, who we all know in dog training, Harry Harlow with his rhesus monkeys experiments, all these kind of things. He got his inspiration from what was going on within looking at animals and how they connected. And if we take that even up to date now with Dr. Cole and Dr. Cassioppo, who have been doing a lot of looking at what happens when we have social pain for a period of time, especially chronic social rejection, if you like, loneliness. And by the way, you can be in a crowd full of people, you can be in your house with all your family and still feel lonely. What they've found is it changes us physiologically. It dials down our antiviral system. It dials up our inflammatory system. And their conclusion is this is likely to be the same experience for all social mammals because it makes sense, Alexia. We need to feel, as when we're younger, that we are allowed to communicate social needs. Now, what's interesting about attachment, by the way, John Bowlby is the name we think about, but actually the real driving force there for me is Mary Ainsworth, who never gets talked about enough. Which was as it was back in the day because the men got all the glory. But she worked with John Bowlby, and she actually recognized, I recognize my own privilege here and I recognize my own cultural biases. So I'm going to go to Africa. She spent years in Uganda looking at how the women there, this is going back into the 50s, how the women there were bringing up their children, and she saw the notion of co-regulation and how important that was. This comes into now polyvagal stuff and Stephen Porges. These are not separate from me. They're all strands that we can put together because it makes sense. So as a child, then, your needs that you're trying to communicate, even if they're through behaviors that might be difficult or challenging, what's your brain's feedback from that behavior regarding about whether you're going to be heard or not heard? What behaviors are like to get you heard? But is that actually stuff that is going to be supportive or not? Can your parent help co-regulate? Because the thing is, all juveniles are designed to dysregulate for whatever reason Mother Nature wants for that. And that's been shown both by how our nervous system is and also that supportive part of that brain, that modulating part of the brain that doesn't come online till a lot later. So there is this element of, okay, how do we show support, a really good, supportive, safe way of being able to learn how to regulate? Because learning to regulate is not innate. We have to learn it. And then when we think about social processing theory and how big that is now about, especially, so for you and I, and most of us as adults, will go into a social situation and we'll encode that and we'll think about what is actually happening and what our response, and it will happen very quickly. Children, it's a lot slower. They're learning that process all the time. And I believe this is the same for dogs because it's a similar part of the brain that we know dogs have, and also it makes sense again to think, okay, and this is that notion of socializing. What's actually happening here? And what they found a lot with the social processing theory is that this was very applicable to children with behavioral challenges, especially ones who could be a bit aggressive. So, for example, if you're a child and a kid bumps into you, another kid, based on your social processing that you've done, does your brain think, well, that was an accident, or you did that deliberately and I'm going to have to punch you in the face? See how we develop these responses. Now, where is the ability for child development for them to find their own way of looking at the world? And the three most important words here for me are processing, engagements, and exits. Our ability to process based on the data that we already have, what that processing already tells us, the processing based on our experiences, especially with our primary caregivers, we're already developing filters. Socializing for dogs does not start outside on the walk when they see other dogs and people. It starts in the home. The moment that dog sets foot in our house, they are working out their social relationship with us, especially puppies, right? And this is the big thing that it shifts, because we have to recognize, I'm not anti-training, but most of what we do through training has no innate value to the dog. And if you imagine processing, if you imagine the brain has lots of little doors in it, we need as many doors to stay open. to have a chance at processing well, for sensory integration to work well, so that when we get to adults, a lot of that information is being dealt with our back brain. We don't have to think about it anymore. Pain, trauma, stress, and excitement and frustration fall under stress too, are big door closers. Trauma, I think, closes doors like trauma, right? And guess what? The first doors to start closing are the doors we put training behind, because they have no value to the dog. The doors that stay open are the survival doors, right? So processing engagements and exits. So processing, how does that dog process? What are their processing needs? What are they predicting engagement is likely to be? Social, environmental, whatever. And where do they think their exits are or not? The ability to leave that situation. The history of engagements and exits feeds into processing again for next time. So I've got some great videos of me with Molly, who came to us at 16 weeks, teaching us. This is the thing. I've got I'll come on to this finally in a second. Teaching us her processing engagement and exit preferences, teaching us her safety needs on her terms, physical, emotional, and social. And we've got to change how we view stuff, because I genuinely believe that the increase in behavioral challenges, the increase in aggression, and all these kind of things come primarily a factor of, there's many, of actually what we're influencing in that first 12 months regarding social safety. And the evidence seems to show the same in the human side of stuff as well, with what I was talking about earlier regarding criminality. It makes sense, Alexa, because as a social species, there's always a friction between our individual social safety needs and what we need to compromise in that. We call it negotiated safety, regarding society's need to function as a society. So there's a slight, so we have to think about these things. But if from a young age you think, well, my needs aren't being met, I'm not being listened to, I don't feel safe, I'm having to compromise on that. There's a great saying by a psychologist, I can't remember who said it, that when a child feels unsafe with their parents, for example, on many levels, and often, by the way, that isn't because the parents are horrible, because again, they're trying their best, but a lot of the time parents aren't aware of this stuff. That's the key. They don't love their parents less, they love themselves less. So this is the key. So it's no wonder then when we get to adulthood then, and when I worked a lot with people when I was involved in supporting people through human therapies who in the 50s and 60s have been part of the Borstal system here in the UK. So these were teenage men invariably who were put into a system because their behaviour was deemed to be the problem. And it wasn't all bad stuff, because, if you behave well, you can do more woodwork or do mechanics or whatever. But equally, if you don't behave, you'll end up in isolation or you'll get corporal punishment. No understanding about why they're behaving that way in the first place. And now they're even more socially detached. So it's no wonder then when they're older then, to punch somebody in the face, to stab somebody or to hurt somebody doesn't compute now, because you're lacking in that social empathy and connection. It's powerful stuff, Alexia. I think we've got to think about this stuff, about what we're doing, coming back to dogs, what we're doing in that first 12 months. Because, what do they need to learn? Do they need to learn stuff? Or what that I feel they need to learn is they have a voice, a big one, that they can find safety on their terms, that we are their return to safety, and that they can feel the quality of our presence as their primary caregivers. I think that's the most important thing. And then when they get to, I don't do classes, but my clients who I support have young dogs. I don't put any emphasis on them to teach the dog anything functionally until the dog's getting closer to 12 months, actually. But that doesn't mean the dog's not learning something. The dog's learning something all the time. The most important thing is secure attachment and the ability to regulate. If you've got a dog who does that, then it's pretty simple after that, actually.
Oh, thank you for sharing all that, and thank you for sharing your story too. I just want to honor that experience as well. And I think you're absolutely right that the most important thing that we can do is actually create the safe space for our dogs. But I think, especially I'd like to ask you about how you referenced that we do this within the first 12 months. How do we best support rescue dogs, for example, that often have a really traumatic background, and they, unlike humans, can't speak about that? So they are completely demonstrating that through behavior. And so the onus is on us to then better understand what is it there, again, if it's information, what are they trying to communicate about how they need to feel safe? How would you advise people kind of create opportunities for safe attachment with rescue dogs or dogs that have gone through difficult experiences? What does that look like for them?
I think in some ways it's easier, but because they can't speak in that sense, and they're not going to have all the normal defense mechanisms that can make it challenging for us to kind of really get through to another human being.
Mm.
Because they're going to come with a lot of internal defense mechanisms, I say, and a lot of different layers. I think dogs are really honest if we allow them to, and this is the big thing. This is about the emancipation of dogs, actually. It's the freedom to act as an individual, the freedom to communicate need, and freedom to behave. God forbid, the shock horror. People think, well, to behave. And I specialize in working with aggression, and probably half of my workload is what made people might class as dangerous dogs. And they're dangerous because they don't feel heard and they don't feel safe, and they're not finding relief, something often physical pain, but emotional and social pain too. So actually, if there is a potential dangerous outcome, and that's why I don't like the term aggressive. I'm more interested in what danger does this dog pose to me, others, and themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when we understand that for where they are now, we will mitigate for that to look at physical safety. But then my role is to create emotional and social safety for that dog. And that's by allowing them to behave. And I see behavior like painting a picture. I want the dog to paint their picture for me. I need to support the caregiver to allow the dog to paint their picture without us grabbing the brush all the time, thinking that we can paint it better. So this is important. So I have my learn, support, teach mantra, really. So learn from the dog first. And these dogs, even those ones who are very shut down, even those ones who are clearly traumatized, even those ones struggling, that's part of their survival story. We've got a lot to learn from them. Come back to that in a minute. And then support what we've learned. So that's often about management and adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Adaptation includes adaptation of expectation. And that's important. And a lot of caregivers, a lot of them say, I didn't sign up for this. I was told all this by the rescue or, whatever else. And I've had dogs all my life and whatever it is. And it's like, well, you haven't had this dog and we have to look at this. And then teach. If we're going to teach anything, we want to try based on what we've learned and what we're supporting. We want to try and teach things that we feel are likely to have more innate value for the dog. So, and after that, you can train what you like. But I think if we get that right, so actually, it's about good observations. It's about time. It's about doing less. We, especially here in the West, we have a very productive mindset. Comes from our capitalistic surroundings. I've got to be productive. Got to do stuff. So for caregivers, they're like, well, so he's telling me I don't have to take the dog out for 3 walks. Say no. You're telling me I don't have to be doing this. No. In this case, no. So giving people permission, and then being aware of why that might be hard for them and supporting them through that. Thing with trauma is the golden rule for trauma. A lot of people, it's a big buzzword at the moment, being trauma informed, and I think that's great. But it's no good if you're still diving back into your training toolkit again to get behavior change, because you're not getting it. Because the most important thing about trauma-informed approach, the top thing is don't add more trauma. How can you do that unless you allow space? There's a phrase we use in human terms called scaffolding. Creating the structure of support so that we can hold space, if you like, and allow the process to happen on a dog-led basis.
Mm.
And it can take a long time, actually. It can take a long time sometimes for that nervous system to kind of come back into the room, if you like, because it ends up being very withdrawn into survival stuff. Those doors that I was talking about earlier, they have to open when they're ready. The big thing there, though, we see this with children who come into foster dogs. They want to know that what they communicate, and it doesn't matter how they communicate it, will find a secure base response. And that's challenging, though, isn't it? Because when the dog's growling, barking, toileting in the house, trying to bite you, for me, it's all that dog's way of trying to get feedback from that behavior, really. And when I have dogs who kind of express themselves like that with me through aggression, I know often they're just testing my response. and feeling the quality of my presence again. And so if we dive in, even with reinforcement, no, I'm not having that. You've got to do this. How's the dog going to learn to feel safe? A good example of this is quite often a dog who comes a bit shut down, could be many months down the line, and then suddenly they start barking at the postman or growling at the next door neighbor. That's the time often people jump on the behavior, and the dog's like, I was just starting to feel safe enough to communicate how I feel, and now I feel I can't again. So that's why people need support to think in these terms, and you get these best outcomes. I share a case study about a dog called a Pooh, who a UK couple over in Spain found him tied up. His history was he was 6 years old, 5 years either tied up or in a pen, 2 years without any human contact, bite history, size of a bear. But this couple fell in love with him. They built a compound in their garden. So it wasn't just like a kennel, it was like a zoo almost. They had to wear bite sleeves and bite trousers. So I get the call then. We've got this dog now that they've got over. How do we help this dog? Well, we help this dog by learn, support, teach. We had to support a Pooh to feel safe with his primary caregivers. And that involved him having to behave sometimes. But again, we mitigated for the more dangerous side of that. We had to help him feel safe in that environment. We had to help him. And the thing is, you know that when you allow yourself to see everything as a request. Can I ask this of you? It's a principle that I brought over from human side of things, of sensory mapping. How does this look? How do you map that? What's the response? And we have to take the feedback. And sometimes the feedback is that isn't great. I'm going to have a go at you. It's like, okay, I get that then. I'm learning that now. But it's magical, Alexia. I can't tell you how magical it is. You know, with that Pooh story, we went to the point that he was walking out in the environment. You know, we did a lot of free work with him. We brought a lot of looking at sensory mapping because he had no point of reference olfactorily with the world that he ended up in. We brought the olfactory world to him by using little rags. And then during free work, which is just laying out different activities and that kind of thing, he could take in olfactorily. And in fact, when I met him, we did a lot on Zoom before I went up there, and I sent some items of clothing up for him to have in his compound. And I was the first person he didn't throw himself at the edge of the compound when I met him. And in fact, because I was talking with the caregivers around the corner, by the time we got around the corner, I'm guessing he'd already done some air scenting because he hadn't got visual input. Because a lot of time visual stuff for the survival brain for dogs especially is dialed up quite high, visual and auditory. But it's the nose, when the nose kicks in. So he had chance to not see me, but air scent me. So when I went in the corner, there was just lots of sniffing because he'd already got a profile from me olfactorily, which is important. So all this stuff, it's just how you look at stuff. So bringing it nicely around to what we said earlier, it's not about rights and wrongs and training is wrong or whatever. Training for me isn't good or bad. It's neutral. It's, you know, it's what we do with it and the effect it has on the dog. That's the kind of measure of that. What it is about is asking different questions and allowing ourselves to think, you know what, we need to let the dog guide us on this because it's their survival story, not ours.
Absolutely.
And one final thing on that: no dog is safer to be around by being made to feel less safe. Period. And one of the hardest things now, these discussions. So moving from a more aversive based approach to positive reinforcement for me was moving on. So it's how to do tasks nicer. This is about how we move forwards. And the big tragedy for me, this is the biggest argument we should be putting against aversive training now, because that is damaging those secure attachments. It's damaging the secure base. It's making it really hard for that dog when they are in crisis to rely on their primary attachment. How could they? And this is why I think a lot of caregivers get bitten, actually, because you know, and I think there's lots of reasons why that can happen. But so we have to understand this more, and especially things like shock collars and that kind of thing. I've worked with so many dogs. Shock collar itself is a problem, but because of the nature of the dog, in other words, they mistrust the social engagement with novel people, for example. Trainer can't get near them, Alexia. So who gets to put the shock collar on? The caregiver. Well, then the trainer zaps them from over there. But the last thing the dog had was, you put that on me. I get quite emotional about it because we have to now try and, until that point, that dog probably had a good, secure attachment with their caregiver. And the caregiver is getting the advice from a professional. And most of the people, in fact, all of them actually think about it, who have been advised about aversive, it felt wrong. But part of their brain is like, yeah, but, societal need to punish. And, it's a very compelling message. Yeah, but the behavior is bad, naughty. It's got to be stopped, hasn't it? We've got to nip it in the bud, haven't we? So this notion that they are somehow saving lives, that's a notion that comes from aversive trainers, that they can only deal with these dogs. Well, I work with them all the time, and I can tell you we can. But it's smoke and mirrors, it's gaslighting, actually, in many ways for the general public. And the problem with the task-only approach is if the task can't be done, either the dog's not good enough, that's what the trainer will say, or the caregiver's not doing it right. Because somebody's always to blame, right? But the problem is, so it's hard, isn't it? So it's tough. So I find caregivers, the vast majority of people, they're stuck in task when I meet them. They're stuck in a lot of societal pressures about how we're supposed to conform and how it's supposed to be. When they hear this message, the majority of them, it's such a relief. They get emotional about it.
Mm-hmm.
They see their own emotion. They see their own lived experience to it. They see their own control and coercion that they've experienced to their life, their own lack of safety. They get it.
Yeah, no, it's so powerful. Thank you for sharing all of this. And I think that's a big reason why your work and your approach and the conversations that you facilitate are so resonant for me, is because it is a breath of fresh air, and it's such a reframe. And I think one of the key parts of that reframe is exactly like you said, it allows us to look at ourselves. And everything starts with us. Everything starts with us. We take all of the actions that we take based upon exactly what we were saying, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel safe in the world, etc. And so for me, the gift of working with dogs in this way, the fact that we have invited a different species to live with us so intimately, is such a beautiful gift of self-discovery, that when we take it, when we see it as that, and we actually work with it in that way, that can benefit just absolutely everybody. And I think that my own experience with my dog, Lucky, really, really echoes that. A dog that came to me with trauma. I wasn't expecting to get a dog. He just showed up. I wasn't prepared for it. And then having to go down that route of sifting through what feels like a right approach to work with a dog, and how do I best create this safe space, and people telling me, you have to stop picking him up when he's afraid. He's a Chihuahua mix. And I learned very quickly that what makes him feel the safest is when he's frightened, he can run to me and I'll hold him.
Yeah.
But looking at how much I wanted that as a kid and didn't necessarily get it. And it's just been such a healing journey for me. And Lucky first came into my life when a curandero I ended up visiting in Mexico, when I thought I needed my chakras unblocked, said to me, you don't need your chakras unblocked. You're a bruja, a witch, somebody who works with energy. You need to learn to work with your energy better. And by the way, dogs and cats are healers for you. So pay attention to them as they're crossing your path now. And he literally showed up at my door. And whilst I had this idea that healing was going to be all like unicorns and rainbows, and it's been anything but that with him, just an immense gift of healing at a core level. And I think for me, that's one of the beauties that comes with having dogs in our lives, especially when you approach the relationship with them in the way that you're speaking about, that it is about building a relationship. It's not about training an animal.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think training has a role, but also I feel that the kind of over focus on it in the last 30, 40 years is quite new. So growing up here in the 70s in the UK, people didn't do trainings as such. They would just, they had relationships with their dogs. I'm not saying welfare was any better or worse, but I think it was more relational. You just had a dog and you were there. Then I think the general public were convinced of this thing about training and compliance and obedience and all this and the whole dominance stuff. And it's ruined that relationship that most people wanted with their dog in the first place. Well, we have them, right? So I think you're right. I think it unlocks a lot of stuff for us. And I love that notion of healing. And one thing to bear in mind about healing isn't always about moving to a destination of being healed. I think it's just really important to remember that. I think
Yep.
it's about some things. It's a lifetime of what we do, and it's about changing our relationship with a lot of the stuff, changing our relationship with our trauma, our relationship with the feelings, understanding all these things, allowing space for those feelings to sit with them. And dogs help us to do that. They really do. So I think, yeah, and I think it is about multiple voices. I said at my dog centered care platform, I have my view on things. I share these things. I try to have quite a philosophical view of behavior because I think it's good to have our individual disciplines and we like to geek out on something. But at some point, we do need to think about philosophy as it allows us to step back and think, okay, what does this mean then for the individual lived experience? And the bottom line is, Alexia, the only lived experience I can validate is my own. I know that's it. And I think, when you think of John Locke's kind of thoughts, the big philosopher saying, we can both think, oh, isn't that a beautiful blue sky? But you might be seeing it as green. I might be seeing it as blue. You might be seeing it a color I've never seen before, but we have that point of reference. So we have to start with self a little bit. I do a lot of emotional health support for professionals, because when you work in a more empathetic way, when you work in a more connected way, the big thing that you've got to learn is it's important to turn up to the emotional experience of another, but also recognize that you're not responsible for it. Maybe that's a conversation for another chat. But it's
Yes.
important we learn that and understanding our layers, finding self, understanding that we have a part of our brain that is very much influenced by our trauma and our problems and our challenges. I call mine Bob. I think it's quite good to recognize that, and also to give Bob some love because Bob wants to dive in straight away. When somebody says something narky to me or whatever else, Bob wants to dive in, right? So I've had to learn to, like we all need to, our relationship with Bob is important and understanding that, but and our relationship with ego and understanding that kind of straddling both is our present self. We can learn to change our responses to things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think dogs can help us with that. What they do for me, like I say, different animals do it for different people. Allows us to be present.
Mm. Oh, I love this. There are so many things that we can talk about. I would love to have you back on and dive into more of these things because there's just not enough time today. But I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm grateful for this conversation. I'm grateful for you creating a platform for people to show up as their authentic selves and be validated and recognized for their experiences with their dogs. The world needs more of it. So thank you for doing all of that.
And likewise, I'm looking forward to catching up on a lot of more of your podcast episodes and the kind of people that come in. And I think it takes something actually, Alexia, to do that because the two things I think to finish on for us all to think about whether you're a professional or a caregiver is to stay humble enough to be open to the experiences of others, and at the same time to give ourselves grace with the lifelong experiment that is our lives. And the wonderful Sarah Fisher, who is a dear friend and also one of my people I kind of really idolize really a bit, but she says mistakes are just mistakes, and it's giving ourselves grace to think, okay, that was that. What does that mean for me then? What did I learn with that? And often the question we ask ourselves is, what did I learn about my own emotional and social and physical safety from that? Actually, that's the key.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And the next step from with that would be, and how do I honor those needs?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Absolutely. I have one final question for you before I let you go. And this is for you specifically. I'm wondering what you feel like either your dogs or the dogs you've worked with generally have taught you about what it means to be human.
Well, it's a very deep, profound question to finish on, but I think it's so much. Milo, who's not with me anymore, he was the dog who, but when I think about my timeline in my life, when I had my breakdown, that was the big shift because that's how I ended up working with animals in the first place, actually. And that's a long story. And Milo was one of the early dogs for me. And he very much looked me right in the eyes and thought, all the stuff you think you know, you can forget that because I have a story that I need to tell you, my survival story. And we kind of went through our healing together. actually, because he taught me so much about my own process, actually moving through, and about that everything's kind of okay. Not that everything's okay now, but that is okay. But also, even the other stuff, even the uncomfortable stuff, was okay too, as long as we think about this thing about how we move forwards with it. So I think it's a deep thing. And every other dog that I've met, every dog that I've worked with, has taught me something extra about that, about my own lived experience, because they do. But we have to be open to it. Remember, that's not easy because our brain doesn't want to be. So we have to find some safe space. That's why my kind of service for professionals is called Safe Space. We need to find a safe space, either as a caregiver. I think we need to provide more for caregivers. I call them expert caregivers because many of them, they know their stuff inside out. They've read every book, they've seen every TV show, and actually they have a story to tell themselves. And some of the best stories in dog-centered care, the most powerful ones, come from caregivers.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you for that. Where can people find more information about dog-centered care and any other offerings?
So Dog-Centered Care is my Facebook group, and I also have the chance to interview a lot of wonderful people, hopefully yourself soon. And they're all on the Dog-Centered Care YouTube channel. There's over 100 now. And these are people who are leaders in the field of neurobiology, the science side of things, but also different professionals, dog trainers, groomers, and a lot of caregivers. We've got somebody coming in next week, actually, who's they shared their story with their foster dog, Ragnar, which really touched a lot of people, and she's going to come in. So it's a really good mix if you want to explore things. And also the wonderful Sindor Pangal, who's another big influence for me, and her work over in India. And there's a whole Barks series there, education platforms called Barks. So that's where you can find things. Also, dogcc.org is my own little website where I kind of put up podcasts and some of the things that I've written about. You can find Phantom of the Opera there. But it's not really about I don't have work as such. Well, I do work. For me, it's about trying to facilitate an invitation for people to think about their own mindset. That's all. And there's no rights or wrongs. It's what is important to you. Anybody listening to us today, what did you take away from that? What thread would you thought that really resonated with me? And invariably within Dog-Centered Care, especially the YouTube channel, you will find a speaker who you can build on that thread with, I think.
Absolutely. I can attest to that. It's a wonderful site. Thank you so much. It has been such a joy talking with you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Andrew Hale. I would love to hear what your takeaways were. DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, leave a comment, or reach out to me on my website, mysticdogmama.com. To learn more about Andrew and his work and to connect with him, please visit his website, dogcc.org. Here you'll be able to find links to his Facebook page and YouTube channel, which are both filled with really helpful resources. I've left this link in the show notes. And if you're interested in learning more about our brand new Fetch membership, reach out to me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, or you can also sign up for our newsletter in the link that I've shared in the show notes. All right, until next time.